Hi, welcome to a new episode in the Internet Surfer, hosting the most horror and creepiest stories from Reddit. Please don't forget to comment, like, share, and subscribe. Enjoy.
Orion Pest Control, The White Stag, a long horror story from Reddit. Nosleep. From the moment I stepped through the door, I could hear the housekeeper's muffled grumblings. The homeowner was sitting in his living room, anxiously tapping his foot as scratching could be heard above our heads. At this point, I was not sure if it had transformed or not. Given that it had not directly attacked the client, it seemed like it still could be reasoned with. He sheepishly told me that things had been going well with his otherworldly houseguest until he woke up that morning to find that it had gotten stuck. He was not sure how it had happened. I nodded slowly, trying to figure out how in the hell I was going to fix this mess. Okay. I will have to find some way to get it out of the wall without it killing one or both of us, so it would be best if you found somewhere safe to hang out. And I am going to have to get someone else down here to watch my back. He muttered to call me when it was safe, then left. I got a hold of Victor, telling him about the situation as the glassware around me started to quake as the housekeeper let out a blood-curdling screech. How the fuck did it get in the walls? Was the first question he asked. I have no idea, I said with a sigh. I'll take a look around, see if I can find an entry point. Don't engage it until I get there, Victor advised. With it being stuck like that, it's bound to be more aggressive than usual. Will do. My first thought after retrieving the toolbox from the company truck was to find the attic. Maybe it had found its way in a hole in the insulation and just fell in. Housekeepers are not burrowers, preferring to live in more civilized conditions. That is why they try to integrate into human dwellings. It was even more upset about the situation than the homeowner was. Using my flashlight, I found a sizable hole in the attic wall that looked like a product of a rodent infestation. There were two things going on at once. That is when I noticed gray feathers littered on some of the floorboards. Strange. Were there birds up there as well? That is when I heard the housekeeper swearing, followed by more scratching. I called out, "Is everything all right?" It yelled, "No, I love being in here. It is delightful." While it was being a dick, at least its willingness to converse meant that it had not transformed. That was a relief. Trying to get it out while it was actively trying to destroy the place would have been even more of a headache. In case it could see me, I resisted the urge to roll my eyes, saying calmly, "I did not mean to patronize you. Can you please knock so that I can find the best way to get you out of there?" The housekeeper grumbled but did as I asked. The floor below me. I followed the sound, trying to locate the room it was trapped behind. Once I found the room where the knocks were loudest, I pressed my ear to the wall. "How well can you move?" I asked. "Got about 2 feet on either side, love," it replied gruffly. "Okay. We have some cables in the truck. Once I get them, I will feed it down to you and use it to pull you up." The housekeeper balked from the other side of the wall. "You're going to fish me out?" "I am going to try. Just wait there and I will be back." Right after I said that I realized how stupid of a statement it was. The housekeeper clearly agreed with me. Where else am I going to go? A wee stroll under the floorboards? Once I got to the cable, I wondered if I would have enough to reach the trapped neighbor. If not, we would have to bust a hole in the client's wall, which would not only be more time-consuming, but also more expensive to repair. That would be a last resort. I returned to the attic, got into position, then slowly lowered the cable down to the housekeeper. "A bit to the right, love," it shouted encouragingly. "Oh, my right, your left." "Yes, that is it." Eventually, I felt a weight on the other end of the cable. After making sure that the housekeeper was ready, I began to pull it up. They are surprisingly light. I wonder if their apparent bulk is just hair. After some time pulling, I eventually saw two small hands covered in brown hair. Being as gentle as possible, I gripped the wrists, then pulled the housekeeper towards me. It grunted as it used its legs to keep from scraping itself on the jagged edges around the opening. Victor came in right at that moment, finding us just as the housekeeper slipped. I grabbed it out of the air right as it clung to my shoulders in reflex, resulting in me holding it like a little kid against my hip. Nobody was happy about this, especially not the housekeeper. "I told you to wait," Victor snapped. I awkwardly set the housekeeper down, facing the boss as I defended myself. "Yeah, I know, I am sorry. I got carried away. You or the one that cares for this house could have gotten hurt." "Yes, father," I muttered under my breath. He pretended not to hear me, addressing the housekeeper. "Are you all right?" The housekeeper scowled. "I am just dandy, kept for those fucking rats in the walls. I was chasing me, since they were all destructive like, next thing I know my arse is in that wall like the wee cunt from the cask of Amontillado. Thought for sure someone was going to brick it up." With spectacular timing, more scratching could be heard from the walls. Victor replied, "I'll start looking around for the rat's nest, if you want to get the housekeeper a drink." Thankfully, the homeowner had Bailey's. The housekeeper needed it. When the housekeeper began to vent about the rats, I immediately realized that we were dealing with something else. These rats had feathers. The housekeeper found the feathered rats crawling over the homeowner in his sleep. The housekeeper had chased them off and tried to catch them, but then Yen saw how that went. I asked the housekeeper if it would mind if I excused myself. It was fine with it, sipping delicately and happily at its Irish cream. That is when I heard what sounded like a baby's cry. Victor had found the feathered rats. I hurried back out to the truck to retrieve a cage. In the past, the only way that feathered rats could be dealt with was to burn the house they had infested down, but we have found that they can be trapped like any other rodents, then humanely euthanized. If the bodies are burned afterwards, they cannot come back. The feathered rats feed on homeowners in their sleep. Common symptoms reported by those who have been parasitized by the feathered rat are exhaustion, extreme thirst, and bizarre dreams. If the infestation goes on for too long, the homeowner will die of dehydration. Our client was lucky that he had a housekeeper watching over him. When I returned with the cage, Victor had one of the feathered rats by the tail. They are also much larger than most rats, the same size as a common house cat. It let out another creepy, infantile cry as he shoved it into the open cage. It was pregnant. We had caught it before it had given birth, thank goodness. We just had to find the other members of its colony. It took hours of digging through insulation to find all of them, but eventually we rounded them all up in the cage. By the time that we were finally done, the housekeeper had polished off the entire bottle of Bailey's. It was feeling good. It drunkenly cheered for us from where it sat in the kitchen. "That's right, you were weird. Get out here." Since the infestation had been more severe than anticipated, the client came home before we had had a chance to call him to update him on the situation. He arrived just as Victor started carrying the cage of screaming feathered vermin to the truck. Understandably, the client had many questions. Despite my exhaustion, I answered as best as I could while Victor loaded up the feathered rats. Yes, the housekeeper was rescued from the walls. No, those were not only regular rats. Yes, we would return the following day to patch up the holes in the walls. No, I am not sure if insurance covers it, he will have to talk to his agent. Before I left, I advised him to get more Baileys. That housekeeper had earned it. From what I can tell, it still lives with him happily and they appear to have gotten more comfortable with one another. When we got back to the office and disposed of the feathered rats, Victor said he and Reina would return tomorrow. He would be doing that patch work, meanwhile she would be there to bless the house. A solid treatment plan that has not failed us yet. On another note, I should also mention that I got that Jeep I mentioned in my last post. Of course, the first thing Victor did when I drove it to work was look me dead in the eyes and say, "Yeah, you would be a Jeep person. This is a hostile work environment. Eans really want to apply here." I had thought my day was over. But then I saw that blue truck parked in my apartment's lot, the mechanic sitting in the bed of it, strumming his banjo. What does he want? My histone was not shaking. He was not trying to enchant anyone. He was just playing. That did not comfort me any. I tried to keep my expression neutral as I approached him. Iolo gave me a smile. "Evening, pup. Nice Jeep. Used to belong to the Pruitts, didn't it?" My alarm at him knowing their names must have showed on my face. He raised an eyebrow. "Calm down. If I used every name I was given, I would have eaten half the county by now. Y'all give them away so readily nowadays. People like the Pruitts are not much of a chase." That was not reassuring in the slightest. "Why are you here?" I asked carefully, wanting to get right to the point. "Those worms. I hate me and I want your help in dealing with me." "Good Lord. Not the worms again." I politely told him, "That's more of the Department of Wildlife's area than mine. I only deal with them when they are on private property." He gave me an annoyed look, though he kept his voice light. "Now, I know that is some pup. Didn't I catch you fighting one on the side of the road one night? It was blocking my car. I didn't really have any other options." I reasoned. Iolo was not having it. "Department of Wildlife's been dropping the ball. I have seen you do it, so I know you are competent. Now, are you going to keep being a pain in the ass or are you going to do your job?" As embarrassing as it is to admit, I did not want to deal with those worms again, especially after last time. That infestation has been haunting me in my sleep. The difference is that in my dreams, I am the infected one. They feel so real. I can feel the worms tugging at my insides, their flesh sliding against the back of my throat. With a weight on my chest, I released a deep breath. "Fine. Mind if I at least wash up first? I am covered in insulation." "Better not. We are going into the mines." I blinked like an idiot. "The mines?" "Yup. So, my truck or your Jeep?" He replied casually. He wanted me to be alone in worm-infested mines. With him. That was a trap. "You're a powerful creature. I do not see why you need my help in the first place," I said uneasily. The mechanic sighed impatiently, his glare scalding me. "Salt's the only thing that kills me, and seeing as I cannot touch that stuff, which means I am going to need a human. Now if you know what is good for you, pup, you will stop this and get in my truck." I did not argue anymore. Swallowing back the dryness in my mouth, I softened my tone, not wanting to make him angry further. "I am not trying to anger you when I mention this, but since the histone repels you, it might be best if we took the Jeep. I am not taking the stone off, especially if we are going somewhere alone." His smile was not friendly. "Good decision. I will tell you how to get there." Not taking his eyes off me, he slid off his tailgate, holding his instrument by the neck as he followed me to the Jeep. He ended up having to sit in the back seat diagonally from me to accommodate the stone's limits. After a few minutes of driving, the anger seemed to drain from him. Even so, the start of the car ride was tense. It occurred to me then that he was not used to not having complete control over everyone around him. It was driving him crazy. I should have gotten some satisfaction from this, but instead, it made me uneasy. Trying to keep my tone delicate, I broke the silence. "You know, seeing as how we're pretty much stuck dealing with each other, maybe we should try getting used to one another?" When he did not say anything, I continued, "Don't get me wrong, I am not suggesting we become best friends or anything like that. Maybe just get to the point where we can tolerate each other. You know?" After another moment of uncomfortable quiet, he finally answered, "That'll depend on how tonight goes." "What's that supposed to mean?" I asked suspiciously. You know full well I hate that stuff you like to pull. It was tiresome before, it is even more tiresome now. Not wanting to set him off, I kept my voice professional. I understand the wild hunt acts as a sort of army, in a way. When I was in the service, insubordination was strictly punished, so I imagine it works the same way for Yens. Thing is, I am not one of your hunters, so you cannot expect me to behave like one. He snorted. Yeah, I am well aware of that, pup. What is getting me is that you are forgetting that we are not equals. Your life will pass by in the blink of an eye. I will still be here long after humanity eats itself alive. Victor had said before that some of these old neighbors remember when humans had regarded them as gods. I had bet money Iolo was one of them. I conceded, that might be the case. Yeah, I will be a pile of bones someday and you will forget all about me. But until I keel over, which will be another 50 years from now, God willing, you are stuck with me. The mechanic let out a soft chuckle. 50 years? In your line of work? Generous. Even if I don't make it to middle age, I still have plenty of time to annoy you. I joked. Will you at least think about it? It is a small town. We are going to keep running into each other. He paused again before saying, I'll consider it. The rest of the drive went by without a hitch, though he kept making comments about my brakes, saying I needed to get my brake pads replaced soon. No way I am going to his shop for that, not after what happened to the sperm donor. I may have to pay double if I go to the Jagoffs outside of town, but I would rather have my money stolen than my soul. As the roads went from being blacktop to gravel to dirt, a cold feeling settled in my stomach. The hair on the back of my neck stood on end. Something was not right. Iolo mentioned it before I could. You feel it, too, Conkus? We are not wanted here. He directed me to an opening on the side of the rocky hills surrounding us. It resembled a wide, hungry mouth, waiting for something to fall into it. There was a notice nailed to a post that stated that the mine was on the verge of collapse. That looks promising. I commented. Banjo in hand, the mechanic stepped over the caution tape without hesitating. He gave me an impatient glare when I did not immediately follow. Even though every instinct screamed at me that going into that mine was akin to laying down inside of my own grave, I proceeded after him. Using my flashlight to guide us, we followed the tunnel down, finding a clunky steel elevator awaiting us at the end of it. It still had power. With each step, which feeling of not being welcome intensified. Iolo simply ignored it, despite saying earlier that it was affecting him, too. He stood as far from my histone as he could get in that small space, resigning us to stay in opposite corners. Meanwhile, I was on edge, wary of every creak. Trying to alleviate some of the tension building up in my chest, I asked, what makes you think the worms came from down here? I took a few of the miners to the other side after it hit the fan down here. All those signs you saw about there being a structural collapse. They dug too deep. Dug right into where something was sleeping. My next question was one I was not sure I wanted the answer to, but knew that I needed. Can the worms infect the neighbors of the hills? Sure can. Lovely. Just what I wanted to hear. The elevator stopped. The air felt damp and stale down there. There was a tense, uneasy quiet as if the mind of something in it was listening for us. Even though the mine was more spacious than I had thought it would be, it still felt like it was trying to press in on me. My flashlight cut through the darkness, showing nothing but abandoned mining equipment, at first. It looked like operations had stopped recently and abruptly. When you say shit hit the fan down here, what happened, exactly? I asked, nervous to hear the answer. The mechanic shrugged a shoulder. Worms woke up hungry. I mean, did they take the miners over or do something else? It just ate me up. I thought back to when I saw that buck swallowing an opossum and shuddered. The mechanic noticed. I could hear the smile in his voice as he said, these things really get to you, don't they? They just disgust me, is all. I answered, hoping that if I could play it off correctly, he would not find some way to use it against me. I received only a snicker in response. I do not think I succeeded. As we traveled further into the mine, I discovered a rusty brown stain on the ground as if something had been dragged. A handprint of the same color was visible further on. The mechanic began to play a song then, its slow melody sinister as it reverberated off the rock surrounding us. Even though I knew his song was not for me, my jaw clenched involuntarily. The truth is that I cannot hear that instrument without my mind going back to all the horrible things that he could do with it. My flashlight picked up the glow of eyes in front of us. I directed its beam to illuminate what they belonged to. At first, it looked like a white deer, but the longer I stared at it, the less sure I was. Its white fur looked slimy, spotted with dirt and dried blood, most of the grime situated around its long neck. Unlike the animals I have seen infected in the past, its stomach was not bulging. Its pale blue eyes were clear rather than wild and confused. I noticed then that the white stag's antlers were in strange, jagged patterns, all sharp angles in contrast to a typical buck's curved ones. The shape of its skull was weird as well, the nose more sloped, the eyes seeming to sit close enough together to face forward. It stood unnervingly still, not blinking as it watched us. Slowly, the skin on its face peeled away like the petals of a meaty flower, revealing the largest worm I had seen yet, the diameter of a grown man's thigh. I had thought that seeing that man infected was my worst nightmare coming true. I had been wrong. The mechanic flicked a string on his banjo. The stag's front and back end fell away from each other in an explosion of gore that coated the walls, then the front end began to slither towards us. Backing away as my heart fluttered, I hurriedly pulled out my shotgun, firing a salt shell at it. The stag shuddered as the shell found its mark, then the animal turned around to double back. "Where you are going, you ugly piece of shit?" Iolo called after it. 1 second, he was to my left, then in the next, he was in front of the white stag, cutting off its escape. He plucked the strings again. There was a sound like wet cloth being torn. I raced past the discarded rear end of the white stag, trying to keep up. Just as I took aim to fire at it again, something slammed into me from behind, tossing me to the ground hard enough to make me roll. I kept going just as a hoof slammed onto the ground where my skull had just been. I managed to get my bearings enough to crab walk away from my attacker, realizing to my horror that it was the white stag's rear end, walking around independently. What I had thought were intestines were a cluster of worms, trying to untangle themselves as they hastily tried to get to me. "You've got to be kidding me!" I yelled as I scrambled away from it, locating my shotgun just as the bundle of parasites jerked the rear end forward. I shot at the worm not just as one of them freed themselves, quick as a whip. The shot blew it back, but not before I had felt the worm's teeth tear at my neck. Panic made my hands shake, but even so, I managed to shoot it again as it staggered. The white stag's hooves slipped in its own blood, falling to the ground. I ripped my salt out of my belt and threw some on it, the body beginning to slow like a toy that was running out of batteries until it eventually stilled. The worm cluster had also stopped moving. I heard something light clatter at my feet. A rock? No. No. It was my histone, broken in half. Numbly, I wondered if it had happened when the rear end had knocked into me. Why hadn't the histone protected me from it? Was it because the stag was so primitive? In the moment, answering those questions did not matter. I had to get out of there. Not only because I had been bitten, but if Iolo realized that I was unprotected, without that stone, I did not stand a chance against him in a fight. I hate running from things like this. However, I knew that if I waited too long, those worms would take control, and I would not be any good to anybody then. And if the parasites made me hurt someone, I would not forgive myself. While he was busy with the front half of the white stag, I made a break for it, going back the way we came. I heard him call after me. Oh no. I had thought that he would prioritize the stag over me, considering that it was a bigger threat to him than I was. But before I could get to the elevator, he had emerged from the shadows in front of me, cutting me off just as easily as he had the stag. At first, the mechanic was livid, probably assuming that I was running from cowardice rather than self-preservation, but then his eyes narrowed at the blood coating my neck. "It gets you?" he asked calmly, eyes continuing to scan me from head to toe. Wishing that the tremors racking my body would stop, I nodded quickly, "If I can get out of here fast enough, then dash dot." He was on me before I could react, holding me against the mine wall as I clawed and kicked uselessly at him. His calloused fingers held my jaw to the side as he leaned into me, his mouth fastening around the bite. I clenched my teeth, fighting the scream that wanted to come out as I felt him sucking at the wound. He had caught me in a bad position, not giving me enough room to move to break free. The moment I tried wedging my elbow between us, his hand trapped my wrist, pinning it to the wall behind me. Weakly, I kept trying to struggle, even though it felt completely useless. Suddenly, the mechanic turned his head and spat. The blood on the ground began to squirm. He was sucking the worms out. He could have at least warned me first. I do not know if it was my imagination, but my entire body felt itchy right then, as if millions of worms were crawling under my skin. I did not struggle anymore when he examined the bite, using every ounce of willpower I had to keep from allowing the panic growing within me to take over completely. "That is all for me," Iolo muttered, wiping my blood off his lips with the back of his wrist. He did not release my chin. Before my frantic brain could realize what was happening, he was forcing me to look into his eyes. I tensed up, preparing to have my memories dug into, to be forced to forget his name, something. But it never came. His brows furrowed. We stared at each other in shock for a moment before he shook his head and hissed, "Unfucking believable." His hand slid away from my jaw, followed by the rest of his weight disappearing as he left to get his instrument off the ground. I stayed with my back against the wall, trying to get my thoughts and breathing under control. What if that did not work? They are parasites. Do not think it works the same way as sucking venom out. Steeling myself, I poured some salt into my hand and rubbed it into the bite. My eyes teared up on their own from the harshness of the burn, having to clench my teeth to keep from crying out. The mechanic tossed a glare at me from over his shoulder. "The fuck are you doing?" I rasped, "In case you didn't get them all, or if they can still survive in segments like that stag can. Oh yeah, speaking of, we should finish that thing off." As much as I was afraid to after already being bitten once, I knew it had to be done. If that white stag was the source of these worm infestations, then it was the key to stopping them. We followed a long trail of fresh blood that was accentuated with pieces of white fur. Meanwhile, I tried to process what had just happened. My mind was dulled from pushing back against hysteria. I felt stupid from it. Needing to understand, I whispered, "I don't mean to sound ungrateful, because I am, but why did you help me?" "Because you're no good to me dead, pup," he replied simply. "And as much of a pain as you are now, you'd be even more infuriating as a puppet for the worms. How do I know you're not just going to kill me the moment we take care of the white stag?" Stiffly, he replied, "I will not. And you know I cannot lie or break a vow, so let us just get this done, all right?" As we searched for the white stag, my thoughts continued to be a mess. Was all of this because I named him? He had seemed just as shocked as I was that he could not get into my head. If I was the first to identify him, then this must be a learning experience for him as well. Hooves. I held the flashlight in their direction to see that the white stag was upright, those strange antlers lowered right at us. I shot at it. Its momentum carried it to barrel towards Iolo, only for him to step around it as if it were moving in slow motion. Not wasting time, I poured salt over the horrible beast, noting that I was running low. The white stag began to writhe as it made contact, convulsing violently as white, foamy fluid dripped out of its mouth. Even as the stag started to still, I emptied the rest of the container onto it, not wanting to take the chance of it getting back up. "Is that it?" I asked breathlessly. "Not sure," he answered. "That seemed too easy." "Oh well. At least that is a start to getting this under control." During the trek back to the elevator, the oppressive feeling of being in the wrong place did not alleviate. When he joined me in the elevator, it felt like there was not enough space. I tried to stay as far away from him as possible, my hand resting on the iron poker. Without the histone, I felt entirely too vulnerable, especially in such close quarters. Without warning, Iolo plucked a banjo string. He watched me curiously, the corner of his mouth quirking up when he saw me flinch. He uttered, "Now that is interesting." My nerves were so fried that my fuse was lit instantly. I could not even pretend to be calm anymore. "What did you just try to do?" "Just a little something, to see if I could." "It did not work, so you have nothing to worry about," he said, that infuriating smirk growing. "What did you try to do?" I repeated, not sure if it was anxiety or anger that was making my voice shake. "All that would have happened was that you would drop that poker. That is all," the mechanic explained, leaning against the back of the elevator. "Look, I just want to get out of here and pump myself full of every anti-helminth on the market. So can you please just dash?" He interrupted, "It is like you got a permanent, built-in histone against me, doesn't it? Kept I can get closer to you, now. This is the longest elevator ever. Just stay over there, alright?" I snapped. "Aren't you curious about what other limitations I have?" "I know I am." I did not like the way he had said that. I drew the fire poker, only to see that he was still in the same spot, not appearing to have any intention to move, that wicked smile on his face. "We're just about at the surface," he commented. "I suppose that can wait, least, till you get yourself checked out. Do not want you giving me worms. Bad enough I felt them moving on my tongue when I saved your ass earlier." I could not wait to throw the steel door open, the light of the surface looking heavenly compared to the gloom of the mine. Iolo openly laughed at my eagerness to get away from it, and him. To my relief, he said, "I got something to take care of, so you are on your own for the drive back. See you around, puppy dog." Thank God. The first thing I did when I got back to town was told the people at the hospital that I was exposed to the same parasites as that hunter. They tested me, finding slight traces of some enzymes secreted by the worms in my blood, but no worms themselves. They could not find anything that would indicate an ongoing infection, but they put me on an anti-helminth just to be safe. It has been a few days since then and so far, so good. But Jens better believe that I am not okay. I feel like any random itch or minor twinge in my body is a worm. I am in hell. Something I should also mention is that the white stag is there when I dream. I do not know what to make of that. The dreams themselves are normal, but it is always just there in the corner, watching with deathly stillness.
Thanks for watching. Please comment, like, share and subscribe, the Internet Surfer on YouTube for more horror and scary stories.